The story follows a Berlin-based aviation engineer named Kyle. Following her husband's recent death, she boards a flight along with her young daughter, Julia, in order to bring his body back to their homeland in America for a proper funeral. Things have been pretty stressful for her these days, pushing her to take medication for anxiety and insomnia, but she must appear strong for the sake of her daughter. She tries to ease Julia's fear of flying by revealing that she is the one who designed the airplane they are flying on. After getting to their seat, Julia breathes on the window and draws a small heart on the foggy glass as a good luck charm. Smiling at her endearing action, Kyle has the idea to use the empty seats as makeshift beds for her and Julia, so the two of them promptly go to sleep. Kyle wakes up 3 hours later to find that Julia is missing. In the beginning, Kyle believes that she must be playing somewhere with some kids her age, but she soon finds out that it is not the case. As panic starts to set in, Kyle sprints up and down the floors to search for Julia. She asks the passengers next to her seat about her daughter, but for some reason, no one remembers seeing her. She can understand them not remembering Julia, as the two of them were the first passengers to get on the plane, but even the flight attendants don't seem to recall her daughter boarding the flight. An air hostess named Stephanie makes an announcement about Julia and then moves to contact the airport in Berlin. Kyle is still not satisfied with their efforts and believes that the flight attendants must check every place that a child could possibly hide in. As Kyle is someone who designed the plane, she can name every nook and cranny of the aircraft and will not be deceived by their half-hearted search for Julia. As she is frantically demanding that they put in more effort, Stephanie brings in the shocking news that Julia never boarded the plane in the first place. She counted every passenger and even contacted the departure gate at Berlin, but there is no record of Julia ever being present. Kyle is in disbelief. She rushes to her seat to pull out Julia's luggage as proof, but to her horror, the luggage compartment is empty of her belongings. Growing increasingly desperate, she then runs towards the cockpit and bangs on the door, begging for the pilot to come out and help her. She is quickly apprehended by Carson, who is an air marshal, and he manages to somewhat calm her down. The pilot is ready to help her and comes out of the cockpit to cooperate with the search, but Kyle has nothing of her daughter that can prove that she was even on the flight to begin with. Even Julia's boarding pass is missing, which Kyle claims was stolen from her. The pilot asks the crew members one by one, but all their answers are the same. Julia was never on the plane. The pilot instantly grows doubtful of Kyle because one does not simply disappear from a flying tube, and asks her if she is on any medications. She grows defensive because all she has taken is her anxiety meds and a sleeping pill, and none of them warrant any suspicion. But everyone has already started looking at her like she is crazy. She pleads to the pilot. Julia is already traumatized by her father's death. It is unimaginable how scared she must be to be lost, all alone at this moment. Kyle finally manages to earn some sympathy from the pilot, and he quickly declares an emergency throughout the plane. No passenger is allowed to leave their seats, and the flight crew are responsible for searching every single place a child is able to fit in, including even closets and luggage compartments. Kyle is very thankful and silently leaves to help with the search. All the while, Carson trails after her. She is very annoyed by him, acting like she could fly on a rampage any moment, but she cannot stop him because that is his job. By this time, Kyle has gone back and forth numerous times from one end of the airplane to another, and the passengers are starting to grow anxious. Soon, the flight crew end their search, and the results are still the same. Julia is not on the plane. Kyle finds it unacceptable and starts arguing with the pilot again when, suddenly, she recalls one of the passengers staring at her daughter through the window while they were home. She sprints back to confront the man, who calmly answers that he has never seen Kyle or her daughter before, but as Kyle grows increasingly aggressive, the man also grows angry as he starts suspecting that Kyle has put the blame on him because he is an Arab. To prove his innocence, he shows Carson a telephone bill from the hotel where he was staying last night. The hotel is far away from Kyle's residence, so there is no way he could be anywhere near her that night. Even so, Kyle does not believe a word he is saying. She flies into a rage and tackles him down, but thankfully, Carson jumps to subdue her. He drags her away from the rest of the passengers and tries to talk some sense into her. Julia is no one special. Why would anyone target her specifically? And even if they had to kidnap her, why do it on a plane? Right at that moment, another announcement is made on the plane that all the passengers may now come out of their seats if they wish to. As soon as she hears the announcement, Kyle runs to find the pilot to demand for answers. The pilot gives her devastating news that Julia is already dead. She fell off the roof along with her father and died of internal injuries. Stephanie even acquired the statement of her death through the hospital where her husband was also pronounced dead. Kyle feels as if the world is falling apart. She cannot accept this as the truth, but at the same time, she cannot keep denying it when all the evidence is provided to her. In a frenzy, she runs back to search for Julia again, but she ends up hitting her head and passes out. When she wakes up again, she finds herself handcuffed to her seat and a therapist next to her trying to help control her mental state. The therapist calmly leads her to accept Julia's death, and this time, Kyle also starts to believe that she was just an anxiety-fueled Karen and that Julia has long been dead. But this process of acceptance comes to a screeching halt when Kyle suddenly notices a heart on the window. It was Julia who drew it earlier during the flight. Kyle grows sure that there is a greater conspiracy at play, and someone is trying to make her look insane. Kyle acts smartly and pretends that she needs to have a moment alone to sort out her feelings and requests to use the restroom. The therapist judges her to be in a stable state, so she allows her to get out of her seat. That therapist sucks at her job. As soon as Kyle gets in the restroom, she climbs to the overhead crawl space and sabotages the airplane's electronics. All the people grow frightened because of the sudden power outage. Kyle takes advantage of the chaos and sneaks into the cargo deck to continue her search for Julia. She even opens her husband's casket, hoping to find her there, but to no avail. Before Kyle can cause any further trouble, Carson is able to find her and then drags her back to her seat again. Because of her, the flight now has to make an emergency landing, but this news only delights her. She can search for Julia more thoroughly once they land, but Carson reveals that she would be arrested the moment the plane lands. He leaves Stephanie to keep an eye on her and secretly goes to the lower decks of the plane. He rips out the padding inside the casket of Kyle's husband, revealing some explosives and a detonator. The place where he plants the explosives is deeper inside the avionics, right by Julia's side, who is sleeping peacefully. Carson has been the mastermind all along. He conspired the entire plan together with Stephanie in order to hijack the plane and frame Kyle as the culprit. He had to hide Julia in order to agitate Kyle into opening the casket's lock where the explosives were hidden. Now that the beginning phase of his plan is a success, he makes his way to the cockpit. He lies to the pilot that Kyle is threatening to bomb the plane and is demanding a ransom of $50 million. She will let all the passengers and the crew members get off the plane if they agree to wire the sum into her bank account. The safety of the people is of greater importance, so the pilot has no choice but to agree. By this time, Kyle is already starting to grow suspicious. She sees everyone deboard the plane, starting from the passengers and then the flight crew. Carson acts shifty all the time and interrupts her every time she tries to speak to the pilot. Noticing Kyle, the pilot angrily declares that the ransom has been paid, which leaves Kyle confused. Realizing that his cover is about to be blown, Carson attempts to make a swift escape. But as he steps down from the plane, Kyle suddenly discerns what is going on. She quickly assumes the role of the hijacker and commands him to remain on the plane with her. Carson has no choice but to return if he wants to keep the pretense of being an innocent victim. Soon all of the crew members exit the plane. leaving behind Carson and her. As soon as the door shuts, she sneaks up behind him and makes him kiss a fire extinguisher. Kyle hastily rummages through his pockets to take away the detonator and handcuffs him to a rail while he is still dizzy from the attack. She gets distracted by Stephanie, who turns out to be still on the plane too. Carson regains consciousness and takes this narrow window of opportunity to quickly pull out his gun. Fortunately, Kyle is able to evade all the bullets and locks herself inside the cockpit. Carson, who broke free of the cuffs, chases after her but is unable to break through the closed door. Getting an idea, Kyle throws away a binder in the upper levels through a hatch door as a distraction and successfully manages to draw him away. While Carson is gone, Kyle hastily searches for a way to the avionics section where Julia is. While on her way, she comes across Stephanie, who nervously tries to stop her, but she is no match for Kyle. Kyle knocks her to the floor and manages to get down to the avionics, where she finds Julia unconscious but unharmed. Her relief is short-lived, however, as she can hear Carson getting closer to their location. His patience is running thin as he finds that Stephanie betrayed him and ran away. Out of frustration, he starts revealing all of his plans. He is the one responsible for killing Kyle's husband. By pushing him off from the roof, his accomplices needed a casket to hide the explosives in, as caskets don't go through an X-ray check at the airport. Her husband was the perfect candidate for murder, as Kyle is someone who helped design this aircraft. It would be easier for him to pin the blame on her as the hijacker because she is someone who knows all the ins and outs of the plane. It was also easy to hide Julia. Stephanie and him just had to gag and then dump her into the food bin, and no one cared enough to notice. As he ends his villain monologue, Kyle manages to escape into the aircraft's non-combustible hold along with Julia. Before Carson can even think of escaping, she detonates all the explosives, instantly blowing up the plane and killing Carson in the process. The pair of mother and daughter emerge from the rubble completely unscathed as the members of the flight watch them in astonishment. They realize that Kyle was telling the truth all along. She may technically be a terrorist, but at least she's definitely not a Karen. The next morning at the airport, the pilot captain apologizes to Kyle for misunderstanding her as Stephanie walks past them, already arrested by the FBI. The FBI also informs her that the mortuary director in Berlin has been arrested as well. As Kyle carries Julia to a van, she wakes up and sleepily asks if they were home yet. Kyle is beyond thankful to be able to hear her daughter's voice again and hugs her tightly, replying that they were not there yet. The movie ends here while the van slowly drives them away from the airport. And that's a wrap for this movie recap. Thanks for watching.